What's happening, everybody? Thanks for tuning in to the Crash Bang Boom podcast. Today's guest is part of an expansion of guests for this podcast, which takes us into the realm of extreme sports. And no better a way to bring it in than MMA legend, teacher, and veteran of 170 fights, if you can believe that, in Jermey Horn. Jermey and I get into the early years and Wild West environment of MMA in the 90s, revisit some of his fights throughout his storied career, talk about the mental warfare one encounters when stepping into the cage, his passion for teaching, and a whole lot more. And for any of you in the Salt Lake City area, check out Jeremy's gym at Elite Performance. Today's episode is sponsored by my man Carson Gant, aka OneUpLoops.com. Carson and his team spend an incredible amount of time recording over 400,000 shaker, tambourine, and hi-hat loops at every possible tempo in multiple fields with incredible mics and outboard gear for you to pick and choose. It's organized for you to find exactly what you need with just a few clicks, and everything feels and sounds incredible. You can sign up for free to check it out and gain full access to all 400,000 loops, just starting at $5.99 a month. No download limits, whatever you want, whenever you want. New loops, one-shots, and drum breaks are being added weekly, so check it out at OneUpLoops.com. Crash Bang Boom podcast can be found everywhere podcasts are available. Feel free to check out any of the previous 260-plus episodes and give me a like and or a subscription or a positive review or all of the above, as it is all appreciated. All right, without further ado, let's get into it. Jermey Horn. Crash Bang Boom.
Crowds go mad with joy.
All right, I'm here with MMA legend, fighter, teacher, and owner of Elite Performance MMA in Salt Lake City, and more, I should say, and Jermey Horn. Jermey, how are you doing, man?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely, man. You have such a wild number of fights that you've had throughout the year, and you're a guy that, as I was watching all the way back to the Royce Gracie days of MMA, I remember seeing your fights with Chuck and your other fights in the UFC, and just a crazy amount of competition that you've had over the years. So I'm definitely curious to talk to you a little bit about that. But I was thinking about it, again, as mentioned, if there's 120 fights or so that's on the Wikipedia page, I believe you're saying you've got about 170, which is just unbelievable. And I'd love to talk to you about that journey. But I guess at what age did you even start training if you were competing as early as 1996?
Well, I started training in martial arts when I was 12 at a local gym in Omaha where I was born. But it was kind of your more traditional martial arts. We did a little bit of everything, but we did some of the traditional weapons. We did a little bit of ground fighting. We did a little bit of, judo, boxing, that kind of thing. It was kind of a catch-all.
Mm-hmm.
So I was kind of familiar with the MMA or the NHB mentality back then because we kind of did it.
Right.
Where most styles were, karate is very streamlined into what it's doing. Taekwondo is very much the same. They're very focused on their niche, and we weren't.
Right.
So when MMA rolled around, it was just kind of a logical progression for me. I was like, oh, this is kind of what we're doing. I'll start doing more of that. And start focusing a little bit more onto the groundwork and stuff. And then when the opportunity to fight came around, I jumped at the chance.
Crazy. I mean, in those early years, it's hard to not think about Royce Gracie and the sort of impact that he had. And I think the consciousness around the submission arts, was that something that you started pursuing, having seen those early UFC fights?
Yeah. I mean, we had heard of the Gracies and kind of knew what they were doing down in Brazil, but obviously we didn't know to the extent that, that they were going to. So when the UFC came around, and, like everybody else, I got a bootleg copy of the first UFC, and the rumors were that it's a fight to the death, and there's some guy that's going to die, and we all watch that. We always watch that very first fight of Gordo kicking that tooth out of Chile Chula,
right?
And we were hooked right away. We were like, "This is it. This is what we were born to do."
Oh man!
But yeah, and then we're like, "Oh, okay." So the Gracie's doing groundwork, seems to be beating everybody. So luckily for us, we do a little bit of groundwork, so we should just drive deeper into that and see where that takes us.
Crazy. Again, in the amount of fights that you've had, the first one that I saw, at least via Wikipedia, was 1996. Were there other ones that maybe weren't sanctioned, or once you started, I guess, doing professional quote unquote fights, when did that start, and what was that world like?
It was really wild and kind of the Wild West. So my first fight. So you've been following the sport for a long time, right?
Yes.
So do you remember a show called Mars, Martial Arts Reality Superstars? And
Oh,
Tom Erickson, Murillo Bustamante.
I know Murillo Bustamante, but I don't know that I know that show. I think I started right around like the UFC 1 or whatever,
Yeah,
you know?
so you could look it up. They only did one, and it was an 8-man tournament. It had the finals was Tom Erickson and Murillo, and then also in that tournament there was a Japanese karate guy, a guy named Juan Mott that was also a jiu-jitsu guy, a big Russian judo player that Tom Erickson smashed, and then I don't remember who else was in it, but there was a handful of guys.
Wow.
So the promoters of that show, right around that time, or maybe a little bit before that, were basically just kind of scouring the U.S. looking for people that were interested in kind of trying out to get into this tournament.
Mm.
You know, a local contact came to us and said, "Hey, here's what we're doing. These guys are looking for fights. We'll fly you down to Atlanta. You'll have a fight, and then they'll kind of pick and choose who they want to use for the tournament." I don't know what they used to pick and choose who. The tournament ended up being what it was, but
Right.
but that's so we went down to Atlanta and fought. And at the time, I didn't know who I was going to fight. None of us did. I mean, this was back in the early days before YouTube and the internet so much. And
Right.
so, yeah, I mean, it was like, okay, I'm going to go down there and fight whoever happens to be across the ring from me.
Oh my God.
Oh, yeah. We show up there and, we're sizing up everybody. Like, okay, that guy looks to be about my size. Although I don't know why that was relevant because there were no weight classes. So
God.
we just kind of assumed that they would put us in there with somebody roughly your size.
Mm-hmm.
And that was it.
Wow.
So we did that, and then obviously the UFC broke open the popularity of the sport, and everybody and their brother started doing a show. If you had 100 square feet of space where you could fit a few spectators and a couple of fighters, you were doing shows. So I
Wow.
just got into every one that I could.
Wow. So I'm assuming in the early years, the additional 50 fights or so that might not be mentioned on your Wikipedia, was that a lot of those early years of just bouncing around with these little promotions and just having one-off or maybe even a few fights within a night?
Oh, yeah. I mean, people were still doing tournaments. There were 8-man tournaments, 16, 32-man tournaments, stuff like that.
Whoa.
So, yeah. And obviously the UFC was doing tournaments, and that they eventually phased that out. But a lot of the smaller shows would still do tournaments. So I mean, it wasn't out of the question to be able to do an 8-man tournament Friday night and then drive somewhere else Saturday, and then Saturday night do another 8-man tournament and pick up 6 fights in one weekend.
Oh my God.
I think in 1999, that was one of my busier years. I think I had like 35 fights or maybe 40 fights because I fought every weekend. There were everybody was doing shows. I mean, everybody wanted to watch it. Everybody wanted to do it. Everybody wanted to promote it. There were just so many shows. Like I fought in every rodeo arena you can think of. Anybody that had enough space to sort of put on an event, we were there fighting.
Wow. Of those, are there any in particular or one, two, whatever, where it seemed especially sketchy or just overtly ridiculous as to the setup or anything else? I mean, just the idea of doing it in rodeo setups, I mean, that's wild in and of itself.
Yeah, well, and there's still some guys that do that now. I mean, it seems kind of weird, but it's actually a decent venue.
Right.
They cover the dirt, they throw the cage right down in the center. Everybody gets relatively decent seating. It's a decent option for some of the smaller shows.
Right.
I think they rent the venues pretty cheap. But no, I mean, most of the time, I didn't really have a lot of run-ins with like bad promoters. Like honestly, everybody was able to make a little bit of money, so there was really not a whole lot of need for anybody to screw anybody over.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody wanted to fight. Nobody cared about the opponent. Everybody wanted to buy a ticket. Nobody cared about the price. There wasn't a whole lot of regulation in it, so promoters could do shows fairly cheaply, which means they could pay fighters a little bit more. So, I mean, it just seemed like everybody was kind of, it was an easy opportunity for everybody to stay busy.
Right, right. I was also looking at it, and I mean, just about 30 fights into it, you run across Chuck Liddell for the first time at UFC 19 and end up beating him via an inverted arm triangle choke, which is wild, given the history that you would later see him, and then it's like you run across this guy relatively early in your career. What do you remember about that fight? It looks like it went down in Mississippi.
Yeah. So now we were actually scheduled to fight before that as well. I had fought Frank Shamrock already. Frank was my first fight in the UFC.
Wow.
And then I went down and fought in Brazil for the I think it was the first UFC in Brazil.
Crazy.
Sao Paulo. And so that was actually my third fight in the UFC.
Right.
I was actually supposed to fight Chuck for my first fight.
Oh, damn.
So I knew kind of who he was. I knew he was really, really tough, but I didn't think that he was that experienced on the ground. So that was kind of my forte, and still kind of is. I mean, I'm definitely more experienced on the ground than standing, but
right.
Yeah, my goal is just try to drag him to the ground. And back then, it was kind of strange looking back. It's kind of silly, but back then, everybody that did any kind of grappling thought they had some kind of super secret superpower that nobody else knew about.
Right.
So it's like, I'm going to take him down and I'm going to do this arm lock, and he's never seen it before and he doesn't know what I'm going to do. And
right.
There was a little bit of truth to that, but I'm sure there were hundreds of, if not thousands of other guys training all over thinking the same thing, like, hey, I got this secret that nobody else knows.
Right. Crazy, man. And then, I mean, you have, again, an incredible series of fights, and then you end up seeing Chuck Liddell again back in the UFC. And if I'm looking at it correctly, was he your first fight when you went back to the UFC again, when you met him the second time?
Yes, I believe so.
Yeah.
Chuck had always, like, he's a warrior through and through and always was. And so, he was fighting and he was basically keeping track of his losses. There weren't a lot of them.
Right.
So when he won the title, he made it very clearly known to Dana White. He's like, look, I want you to bring in everybody that's ever beat me, and I want a chance to avenge that loss.
Wow. And
I think at the time I was actually his first loss. So he was like, nope, we're going to start with Jermey Horn. I want him back, bring him in. I want to fight him again.
Crazy.
So they just called me. They're like, hey, Chuck wants to fight everybody that ever beat him. So do you want to come back and fight him again?
Right. That is unbelievable. And what's interesting is that another guy who had his infamous fight with the one and only one of the GOATs in Anderson Silva was Chael Sonnen. You beat Chael Sonnen twice via submission, and then after Chuck Liddell beat him a third time via submission. Yeah. You've submitted Chael Sonnen 3 times.
Yeah. I think, that's just kind of how it goes, man. I think sometimes you just get somebody's number, and because Chael's good, man. He's fought a lot of good submission guys that couldn't beat him, but then I beat him 3 times, and honestly, relatively easily. So I think maybe I'm his kryptonite. I got his number.
Yeah, man. Another guy that you came across that I was thinking about, who was, I think, maybe a little bit later after you fought him, known as a kind of notoriously dirty fighter, and Rousimar Palharis.
Yeah.
Did he have that reputation when you met him? Because, I mean, the guy's Octagon moniker, I believe, translated into the tree stump.
Yeah.
He's a pretty terrifying individual, and notoriously, at least like I said, when I was kind of aware of him, as a fairly dirty fighter who was holding submissions longer than when the ref would intervene.
Oh, yeah.
Did he have that reputation when you fought him?
Oh yeah. I knew exactly what I was getting into when I signed for that fight. I knew that if he got a hold of one of my legs, I was probably going to the hospital.
Oh God, man.
Yeah.
You managed to go to a decision with him, so you managed to thwart the leg break, which is good.
Yeah, I let his reputation get into my head a little bit more. Now you've seen, since then, back then I think he hadn't lost in the UFC. He had beat everybody really decisively and hurt a couple of people.
Yeah.
So he had a really nasty reputation. But then since then, he's had a couple of hard losses, and he's had a couple of losses where people just smoked him,
Right.
And so, like everybody else, he is dangerous. He's a talented fighter, but he's not what he was billed to be. He's beatable just like all of us. But going into that fight, that wasn't the case. I was like, all right, man, if this guy gets a hold of my legs, I'm in trouble. I need to make sure he never gets clear of my legs.
Right.
So I think it was in the second round. I take him down and I get mounted on him, and I put him in that same shoulder choke. And he was gurgling and he was flopping around, and he was in trouble. And he bucked really hard, and all I remember thinking is, oh God, if he gets loose and gets a hold of my leg, I'm in trouble.
Oh man.
So I just abandoned the whole position rather than kind of fight for it, because I didn't want to get into a bit of a scramble and have him get a chance of getting a hold of one of my legs.
Right.
So yeah, but looking back, if I had settled in and really fought a little harder to maintain that position, I'm sure I could have finished him.
Wow.
But I was just so paranoid of him getting a hold of my leg that was my only concern, is don't let him get my leg.
Right. You know, it's funny you mentioned about that kind of reputation getting into your head during the fight. I don't know if you remember seeing Alan Belcher when he fought Rousimar Palharis, but he...
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I actually just watched that again the other day.
Yeah, he like went down into Rousimar's world, and I remember thinking when I was watching it live, what are you doing, dude? And then if I remember right, I think he ended up getting close and knocking him out or something. And I swear, I jumped. I felt like I jumped through the ceiling because I was so worried about that move, you know?
Yeah, well, not only that, but like, you know, he dove in there and Palharis went after one of his legs, and Allen reversed the position on him and had him in nasty trouble. Had him in a had him in like a banana splits, and almost put him in a twister, and like really had him in a lot of trouble.
Oh yeah.
I don't remember what time frame it was in Palharis's career, but that might have been the one where people were like, oh, this guy's beatable.
Right.
He's not this, you know, this boogeyman that's going to rip your limbs off.
Absolutely.
Because, I mean, Alan Belcher's a great jiu-jitsu guy, but back then he was like, this is Alan Belcher, the kickboxer.
Right.
Like, what the hell is this kickboxer doing tying this jiu-jitsu world champion? And now it's like, oh, maybe all of these things that we've thought are set in stone are not quite that accurate. Maybe it comes down to individual fighters, you know. People started getting a little less fearful of him, and then he had I think Nate Marquardt beat him pretty cleanly. I think Hector Lombard beat him pretty fast. So, you know.
Yes. I always, as someone who hasn't competed in the sport and has just known it via being a spectator and a fan, I've often asked myself, you know, how often you get into a fight and fairly early you think, oh, fuck, what did I get myself into? And, you know, then it becomes the battle of maybe trying to not think of those thoughts and trying to just focus on the fact that you can find some way to win.
Oh, yeah.
That's got to be a tough mental battle to experience that and try to get that thought out of your head and focus solely on trying to find a way to win.
Oh, yeah. That was one of the things that I struggled with the most, actually, in my first fight with Chuck, because I had fought Frank, and he caught me in that leg lock. And then I fought a Brazilian fighter named Ebenezer Braga, who was like, he was an old school hard ass, you know, from back in the Vale Tudo of Brazil days. So I mean, he was a stud. And he beat me, caught me in a guillotine, got a little reckless. So now here I am fighting Chuck, and I'm in my third fight in the UFC. And at the time, I had, I think, probably, I don't know, 20 or 25 fights, and I only had like 3 or 4 losses, but 2 of them were in the UFC.
Right.
You know, and so I'm fighting Chuck, and I early on I was kind of struggling to take him down. I'm thinking, yeah, I'm like, God damn it, like I'm better than this. Why is it every time why is it every time I lose, it's on the world stage? You know, I mean, like, you know, obviously that makes a difference. You know, when you're fighting the best of the world, your chance of losing goes up. But
right.
You know, but I remember very clearly thinking that in this fight, like, God damn it, here I am in the UFC, and I'm gonna lose again. You know, what the hell? I'm better than this.
Oof, that is intense, dude. I was thinking about, it's something that I've talked about previously, and being a drummer. I've been playing for 30 years and been, like I said, a fan of MMA since the 90s. I guess I've been drumming since 91, so 31 years this year, which is crazy to be doing anything like that for so long. But I've talked about sort of the correlations between drumming and not only in the physicality of that and MMA, but in particular, I think to be kind of a great drummer, you have to focus on everything from independence to field to multiple styles, whether it be Latin, rock, funk, jazz, etc. And then with MMA, you have to focus, if you're going to be at a high level, on so many varying aspects to create this tool set where you can compete at that level, be it striking, wrestling, jiu-jitsu, etc.
Yeah.
So there's actually always been kind of an interesting correlation of balancing seemingly disparate styles into a sort of singular way of either playing drums or competing in MMA. And I always thought that was kind of an interesting, correlation there, albeit, of course, the physical repercussions are obviously greater in MMA, sure. Even though I've beat myself up pretty good beating drums over 30 years, but which is crazy. But I mean, when you kind of look at your skill set and the varying tools that I kind of mentioned there, would you say that you've always been kind of more comfortable in the submission realm?
Yeah. As I started training more and I started looking a little bit deeper, into the styles and kind of what's behind it all, I got a little bit better understanding of it. But yeah, I've always felt more comfortable grappling. I've always felt, just safer.
Right. one of the reasons outside of just the aforementioned sort of physical aspects, and I alluded to it a little bit earlier about the mental aspect of the sort of discipline of literally playing or practicing or drilling through pain and hoping that you get yourself to having enough of a foundation that you can draw from it in the moment without thinking so much and perhaps reacting or attacking in what is, people call it a flow state, for instance, but
Yeah.
it seems to be this nebulous term, but it's the foundation and the drilling and the practicing and the hours that you have to put in to get yourself to a place where you can just draw on that foundation is a whole nother thing. Is that something that you found yourself in and you felt as though you were best in your fights when you could just react and just do what you trusted yourself to do?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you're absolutely right. There's that mental state that we all seek to get to where, like you said, you're just flowing. Everything is smooth. Nothing takes any effort. It seems like everything slows down. It's like watching that scene in The Matrix.
Right.
When finally realizes how good he is and he's fighting this guy and he kind of just absentmindedly looks away and like he's still fighting him, but he's like, holy crap, this is effortless.
Right.
And yeah, that's exactly how it feels when you can find that state. And yes, it's just a constant battle of trying to get back to that.
Right. I mean, there's so many variables. I mean, if you're feeling especially anxious that day or overtly relaxed or you're tired or you were just sick or you're injured, I mean,
Yep.
Those are all variables that ultimately affect that. And, like you said earlier, it's sometimes not even the opponent, I would imagine, that gets into your head. It's you getting into your own head about, I'm here, am I going to be, and then sort of all of the thought processes that ensue sort of inhibit you from getting there as well.
Yeah, exactly.
One of the last fights that I saw you had, which was as recent, I guess, as 2020, you got a head kick, TKO head kick, man. That's crazy.
Yeah. I still like to fight. I've had a couple of boxing matches since then too. So I just, it's just fun to fight. So I'm going to keep doing it as long as I can.
Right. I mean, 170 into it, and you're feeling like you still got a few more in the tank.
Oh yeah.
You're a year older than me, man, and I've got a little aches and pains, but how are you doing physically after all these years?
I feel pretty good. Honestly now I'm getting a little more achy and calcified, but the less I do.
Right.
They always say you don't quit playing because you get old. You get old because you quit playing.
Right.
So you stop moving, stop working, and things start to stiffen up on you. So. And that's what I did. I kind of spent some time, more time teaching, a little time being lazy, sitting on the couch playing video games and sitting on the sidelines coaching and not being in there training. And so now trying to get back in a flow of training more. So, but other than that, I'm good. I'm healthy. I got no issues. I'm pretty healthy.
That's amazing, man. How long into your career did you start thinking of establishing your own gym or any other means of income outside of fighting?
It kind of came naturally to me. Like every gym I've ever been at, going all the way back to the very beginning, I sort of naturally kind of fell into the role of teacher because I've got a good knack for conveying information.
Mm-hmm.
So, I just was always decent at helping people out. So even when it wasn't my gym, people were like, hey, how'd you do that? Show me how to do that. And I was able to help people. And then it just got to be more and more. And, when I was fighting a lot, I mean, I knew at that point I was fighting full time. That's all I did. And I knew that eventually my goal would be to open a gym and teach other people. Because at this point, I'd been fighting for many years, but I'd also been teaching for probably more than I've been fighting.
Wow. So it all fell into place. That was the natural progression then.
Yeah. And I was like, okay, well, I moved out to Utah here in, I think, 2004.
Okay.
And I was like, well, I want to get some guys to train with, so I guess I'll start by opening a gym and see if I can collect some guys that want to train with me.
Nice.
So, yeah, and I did. And then it just, as my fighting kind of cycled down a little bit, just started focusing more on training the other guys.
Right. What is it, with all these fights? Have you had one particular song that's hyped you up before a fight throughout all the years? Is there a constant there? I'm sure with that many fights, it's changed, but
yeah, it's changed a lot. I mean, not a whole lot. I mean, I like anybody that knows me will tell you that Tool, Maynard, and all of his productions are by far my favorite band, my favorite music. So anything from him is good. But I've had others bounce in and out of there over the years.
Wow. That's cool, man. I don't know how many times you've been able to see Tool throughout the years, but I saw him on the, I guess that would have been 93 Lollapalooza. It was crazy because Rage Against the Machine opened. So it was like 1 p.m. broad daylight in New Orleans. And then Tool went on after them, and Undertow was barely out at that point. So it was wild seeing them in broad daylight and how intense they were. And then flash forward, I saw them in New Orleans in what was quite possibly one of the greatest shows that I've ever seen during the Anima tour. And they played in this old, beautiful theater, very opulent, like incredible old school theater in New Orleans. And once they really started going, I was on the first balcony, and the balcony was bending. People were getting so much into it, and I was just thinking, fuck it, I guess if I'm going to die tonight, I'll at least die watching this incredible show. It was still like one of the like scariest and most intense and just incredible shows. I'm with you, man. That band is unbelievable.
Yeah, they actually just came here, I don't know, timelines are bad for me, just a couple of months ago to here in Utah, and I got to go see them.
Nice.
But I've seen Tool, I think, twice, and I've seen A Perfect Circle once.
Okay.
And I was really hoping, I saw them all three of them were here in Utah when they came through.
Nice.
But and I've always wanted to meet him. I've tried to get in contact with him because some of the, he does jiu-jitsu as well.
Absolutely.
And I know he knows some of the people in the industry, and I've always tried to get in touch with him, but it's hard. I don't get starstruck by anybody. Like I don't care about athletes. I don't care about sports figures. I don't care about actors. None of that matters to me.
Right.
Except for him. I want to meet him. I'm a huge fan of his and have been for many, many years. So he's the only person in this entire world. Like I can meet the president of the United States. I don't care.
Right.
I want to meet Maynard.
That's
I'd love to be able to train with him. That
right.
would be awesome.
Totally. Oh man, I hope that can happen, man. That's amazing. The guy that you're both starstruck by, but also has trained pretty extensively in jiu-jitsu, and you yourself, same. Y'all could roll with your idol. That'd be amazing.
Yeah, it'd be awesome.
Well, I mentioned the Chael Sonnen 3-time defeats, and I mean, I saw you also fought Anderson Silva. When you came across him, what did you think about him at the time? Did you know much about him at the time?
Oh, yeah. I'd seen some of his fights in the past. I knew who he was. I knew how good he was. Although he's gotten way better since then. He just continues to improve.
I know.
But, yeah, I knew who he was.
I tell you what, when I watched talk about the phrase snatching victory from the jaws of defeat, I remember when Chael Sonnen, who, again, you beat 3 times, when he fought Anderson Silva all the way to the 5th round, was winning all the rounds only to get submitted in that 5th round, man. I was like, that was one of the most shocking come from behind victories in MMA that I can remember.
Like I don't know that I've ever seen a fight like that. Like I'm not a big conspiracy guy.
Yeah.
But if ever there was a fight that looked fishy, it was that one.
I hear you, man. I'm with you.
How do you whip somebody's ass for 23 and a half minutes and then lose at the very end? Or how does a guy as amazing as Anderson Silva lose a fight for 23 minutes and not really ever do anything?
Right.
And then at the very end, like, okay, I guess I'll try this triangle. And it worked. He didn't even try to do that before.
Right.
Yeah, just crazy.
I hear you. There was one recently as well where when Alexander Volkanovski fought Brian Ortega, I remember watching Alexander doing what he does. He's such an incredible fighter. And then, an absolute submission ninja, and Ortega grabs a submission on him. And, I mean, you as a submission guy, what did you think about how tight that looked?
I looked pretty tight.
Yeah. I mean, I guess you just have to chalk that up to how ridiculously tough Volkanovski is, but that was another one where my jaw dropped.
Yeah.
I was in a bar watching it with a bunch of people, and I thought, oh, my God, is he really about to pull this off? And that was close, man. Woo!
And sometimes what you run into, do you train yourself? I'm assuming you do, yeah?
I've trained a little bit throughout the years just to kind of learn more about it. I've just been more kind of an obsessive spectator, I guess you could certainly say.
Sure.
Yeah.
Well, so what you will probably have found is that, jiu-jitsu is somewhat anatomically oriented. You can't do a body triangle on somebody if your legs are too short or they're too fat.
Right.
There is some anatomy that needs to match.
Right.
And that triangle choke is kind of one of them.
Mm-hmm.
If you've got incredibly long legs and the person you're doing it to has, relatively thick shoulders, they can find enough of a gap to survive.
Right.
You know, I mean, I've triangled people before where like my legs are just so long that there's plenty of space.
Right.
And they can basically just pull their arm out, even though I have it locked up as tightly as I can.
Damn.
Yeah, and that must be what it was. Just, you know, Volkanovski just had just enough breathing room. You know, maybe Ortega's legs were just a little bit long enough, just a little bit too long, so that he was able to get that breathing room and fight through it.
Right, right. Do you have any guys on your team that you've been training with at your gym, et cetera, that have been doing pretty well that you'd like to talk about?
I mean, nobody in particular. I mean, I got a lot of guys that are doing well, but you know, that's kind of how it goes. You know, I trained a bunch of the guys back in Iowa, and then come out here and kind of start over. You know, Sean O'Connell won the first season of the PFL.
Nice.
At light heavyweight. Demarcus Johnson was in the UFC for a little while. He did pretty well.
Yeah.
And then, you know, those guys kind of move on or retire, and now it's time to start the next crop. So I got a handful of guys, but they're mostly amateurs just getting started. But
right.
I think you'll probably see some guys. But, you know, at the same time, training fighters is a thankless job.
Oh, yeah.
And it's much more fun for me to train like your, you know, quote unquote average people, and take somebody that knows nothing and get them competent and capable of defending themselves and having some fun, you know?
Right, right. Are there any modern guys that you especially dig? I know we've been talking about submissions, and you got the dominant wrestling submission style of somebody like Khamzat Chimaev. But are there some modern MMA fighters out there that you especially enjoy watching?
Oh, yeah. I mean, all those guys are awesome to watch. What I really like more than anything are the guys that win fights with a high level of technicality, whether it's striking or grappling.
Right.
You know, so I like guys. Like, it's fun to watch Colby Covington.
Yeah.
Because his wrestling is just, you know, watching him move, watching him apply pressure to people, watching him blend it all together is cool. I was always a huge fan of BJ Penn. You know, he's never the biggest and strongest, but just, you know, just such a master at everything he did. Everything was as perfect as you can get.
Absolutely.
I'm not a real big fan of like the big tough brawlers that just want to stand and swing in the middle of the ring. You know, I want to see somebody that's going to win with some technique. You know, I'm a big fan of Stephen Thompson.
Right.
I love the way he fights.
Yeah, he's amazing.
You know, just precision and, you know, when you're watching the UFC, let's say you can't watch the fight and all you hear are reports later of the fight.
Right.
You know, are you gonna watch the fight where you hear the guy, you know, it was a sloppy brawl for the first 2.5 rounds, and then fighter A gets a knockout in the third round? You're gonna watch that whole fight?
Right, probably not.
You fast forward to the end and watch the highlight knockout, sure.
Right.
But then you hear that, you know, Stephen Thompson and Masvidal.
Right.
You know, that fight was a decision, but fuck yeah, I want to watch that fight.
Yeah.
You know, I want to watch every minute of that fight because I'm sure that was a great technical display.
Oh, absolutely. When you think about the evolution of the sport, you know, I mean, like I said, you've been doing it for so long. Where do you see athletes now in comparison to when it started? I mean, obviously you have many more outlets for you to study this stuff. You have the benefit of watching all of the fights. You have the internet. You have access to all that. You have more gyms. And then I think you have maybe natural athletes come into it because maybe it's a little more lucrative now. I mean, is that kind of the way you see it presently?
Yeah, you know, I think I see a bit of a decline in the technical application, and I see a rise of like the super strong athletes.
Right.
You know, I see guys that aren't very good on the ground other than, you know, somewhat defensively.
Right.
You know, they're hard to take down. They're hard to submit because they'll just lean against the cage and fight their way back to their feet, which there is some technique there. I don't mean to downplay it like that, but
sure.
Unless you are a supreme striker, Stephen Thompson or Adesanya or some of those guys that are just,
right,
you know, top notch. I mean, I don't want to see, you know, fighter A thug with a purple mohawk that just, you know, like, come on and brawl, bro. I'm just going to stand here and swing sloppy hooks at you and hope you run into one. You know, I don't want to see that.
Right, right.
I mean, again, I'll fast forward to the end of the fight and watch the highlight knockout if it happens, but
right.
If your fight goes to a decision, I'm fast forwarding through it. I don't care.
Yeah.
But yeah, I kind of feel that's kind of the name of the game because now all of these guys, everybody's being rewarded with performance of the night bonuses, which really mean knockout of the night bonuses.
Correct.
Everybody wants that big brawl. Everybody wants to go crazy because the sport is kind of going in a direction where grapplers are not really, they're kind of being hurt. Right? We've already got 5-minute rounds. You can't knee or kick to the head on the ground. The referee's going to stand you up pretty fast if you're not active right away. You know, you got to really be good to be able to adopt that style and still be able to win and make it exciting.
Right. Well, I mean, I think Dagestan would have something to say about that because, I mean, they just keep winning and then it becomes, you know, just undeniable. And then the wrestler grapplers, like, you know, obviously you had Khabib and now you got Islam Makhachev. But those you can't deny those guys. I mean, they just keep winning, you know, so I hear you.
Exactly. And they're exciting and they're driven. But, you know, it blows me away that people would say that Khabib or Makhachev or any of those guys are boring.
Right.
Like, if you're going to, like, back in the old school days, you know, the wrestlers of that era, it was take a guy down into his guard and punch him in the ribs for 15 minutes until the fight was over. That's a boring fight.
Right. Yeah.
It's not boring unless you just don't do anything. But
right.
I would say a stand-up fight where both guys are garbage and they're just standing there taking turns throwing haymakers and home runs at each other, I would say that's just as boring.
Right. Interesting, man. Well, do you have any upcoming projects or anything that you'd want to talk about before we wrap it up?
No, not right now. I mean, just running the gym and trying to stay busy. I've actually gotten, I've been a competitive shooter for quite a while. So
crazy.
I've got a match coming up there, and I'm when I get my head wrapped around something, I'm just all in. And so that's what it's been lately. For the last couple of years, I've been shooting competitively for a while, and that's really about it.
Wow. Awesome, man. Well, Jermey, man, it was great talking to you. Thanks for running through all the years, man. I know, like I said, it's such an extensive career. There's so much to talk about. So it was fun to just touch upon a few aspects of it and pick your brain about the whole process. That was really cool.
Absolutely, man. Anytime.
Right on, man. All right, everybody, thanks for tuning in. I hope y'all dug the mixing up the convo of just drummers, producers, etc., artists, and getting into the more extreme sports side of things, which I've definitely had an interest for many, many years. So that includes everybody from kayakers to mountain bikers to, wingsuit flyers, all of the above. Bull riders, hell, I'm ready to talk to them. Let's get some extreme sports in the mix. We'll catch you on the next one. Crash, bang, boom.